60 trees? The teenage kid at Pete's Pots and Plants asked, eyes wide. For here? He gestured around the suburban landscape. Yep, I said cheerfully. Urban Reforestation Initiative. Very eco-friendly. He just blinked. My name's Walter, Walt for short. I'm at that stage of life where my main ambitions involve comfortable shoes, finding my reading glasses, and enjoying a quiet afternoon. And the absolute best place for that quiet afternoon was under Bartholomew. He was perfect. 60 feet tall, maybe 70, with a canopy that spread wide, casting glorious dappled shade over the entire patio and a good chunk of the lawn. In the summer, sitting under him was like having natural air conditioning. The temperature dropped a good 10 degrees. His leaves rustled in the breeze with a sound more soothing than any white noise machine. Birds loved him. Cardinals, blue jays, woodpeckers, the whole avian choir tuned up in his branches every morning. Squirrels used his trunk as a highway. I practically lived under that tree from May to October. Morning coffee, afternoon reading, evening chats with my wife, Maggie. We'd watch the light filter through the leaves, point out different birds, feel connected to something solid, something real, something that wasn't vinyl siding or obsessively manicured turf grass. Bartholomew wasn't just a tree. He was the tree, the heart of the yard. Look at him today, Maggie would say, sipping her iced tea. Just majestic. He really is, I'd agree, leaning back in my patio chair. Been here longer than any of us. Seen it all. Unfortunately, one of the things Bartholomew had seen recently was the installation of Mrs. Eleanor Davenport's new, blindingly turquoise swimming pool right next door. And Mrs. Davenport did not appreciate Bartholomew's natural contributions to her pristine aquatic environment. Eleanor Davenport keeps a yard so immaculate it looks less like a place people live and more like a high-security botanical exhibit. Her lawn is chemically green, her flower beds are arranged by color wheel, and her new pool gleams like a suspiciously unnatural sapphire. And apparently, Bartholomew's existence was fundamentally incompatible with her vision of sterile perfection. The first salvo came one sunny afternoon. I was attempting to prune a rose bush, badly, when Eleanor summoned me to the fence line with a sharp, "Walter!" "Afternoon, Eleanor," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "Walter," she began, her voice tight with controlled indignation, "I must speak to you about your tree." She gestured towards Bartholomew as if he were a known felon. "Bartholomew?" I asked. "What about him?" "His leavings, Walter," she exclaimed, pointing a trembling finger towards her pool skimmer, which contained perhaps 3 oak leaves and an acorn cap. "It's relentless. Every day, leaves, twigs, acorns. My pool filter is constantly clogged, and look." She pointed to a barely visible smudge on her white patio chaise lounge. "Stains! These oak tannins stain everything." I looked at the 3 leaves. I looked at the vast expanse of Bartholomew's canopy. "Well, Eleanor," I said reasonably, "he is an oak tree. Shedding leaves and acorns is sort of in the job description, especially in the fall." "It's July, Walter," she snapped, "and it's unacceptable. That tree is a nuisance. It looms over my property, dropping its detritus constantly. You need to do something about it." "Do something?" I asked, confused. "Like what? Train him to only drop leaves on my side of the fence?" I offered to come over and help skim her pool whenever she saw leaves. She sniffed dismissively. "It needs," she lowered her voice dramatically, "to be properly managed, or removed." "Removed? Bartholomew?" I actually laughed. "Eleanor, it's a healthy 30-year-old oak tree. Nobody's removing it." "We'll see about that," she muttered darkly, before turning back to her pristine, leaf-free patio. I shook my head. Unreasonable. But surely just one neighbor's grumbling wouldn't lead anywhere. Right? Wrong again. It seemed Mrs. Davenport's complaints carried significant weight with the Oakhaven Estates HOA board, particularly its president, Mr. Reginald Chadwick III. Chadwick was a man who wore bow ties unironically and spoke as if perpetually dictating a legal brief. The letter arrived via certified mail, always a bad sign. Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association. Official notice of violation and required action. Property, 47 Willow Run, Walter Miller. Violation Bylaw 12.5, Landscaping Maintenance and Nuisance Abatement. RC Guideline 7. B. Approved flora and tree size limitations. Dear Mr. Miller, pursuant to multiple complaints received from adjacent property owners, read Eleanor Davenport, regarding excessive debris, leaves, acorns, branches, sap drippings, squirrel activity, originating from the large oak tree located on your property and following a review by the Architectural Review Committee, ARC, the HOA Board has determined that said tree constitutes an ongoing nuisance under Bylaw 12.5. Furthermore, the tree's species, Quercus rubra, and substantial size are deemed non-conforming with current community landscaping standards, ARC Guideline 7B, which favor smaller, less intrusive ornamental varieties. Therefore, you are hereby directed to arrange for the complete removal of the aforementioned oak tree within 60 calendar days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in daily fines, $100, and eventual forced removal, with all associated costs billed to you, the homeowner. Proof of removal by a licensed arborist must be submitted to the board. Sincerely, Reginald Chadwick III, President OHEHOA Board. I read it, my vision blurring with rage. Remove Bartholomew? Because Eleanor didn't like leaves? Because he was non-conforming despite being older than the HOA itself? Maggie! I yelled, my voice shaking. They want to cut down the oak tree. Maggie read the letter, her face paling. No, they can't. It's perfectly healthy. It's our tree. Apparently not, I spat, crumpling the letter slightly. Apparently it's a non-conforming nuisance that offends Eleanor's delicate sensibilities. This is insane. You have to fight this, Walt, Maggie said, her eyes flashing. You have to appeal. Oh, I'm appealing, I assured her. They want to fight over Bartholomew, they're going to get one. My first step was to get professional backup. I called Davy Tree Experts, or some similar reputable company, and scheduled an assessment with a certified arborist. A friendly, knowledgeable woman named Sarah, a different Sarah, came out a few days later. She spent nearly an hour examining Bartholomew from every angle. She checked the trunk for decay, the branches for stability, the canopy for health. She took core samples. She used fancy arborist tools. Well, Walt, she said finally, wiping her hands on her jeans. Good news and bad news. My heart sank. Bad news? Bad news for whoever wants this tree gone, she grinned. This oak is in fantastic shape. Textbook example of a healthy, mature Quercus rubra. Strong central leader, good branch structure, no significant decay or disease. Honestly, it's probably got another 100 years in it. Easy. She gestured towards Eleanor's property. Yeah, it drops leaves and acorns. It's an oak. And maybe that one lower limb could be trimmed back slightly from her roofline for clearance, standard maintenance. But remove it? Absolutely no arboricultural reason to do so. It would be a tragedy. Relief washed over me. Could you put that in writing? Absolutely, she said. Full report, certified arborist seal the works. Armed with Sarah, the arborist's glowing report, I felt confident. Surely, faced with expert testimony, the HOA board would have to back down. Chadwick and his beige brigade couldn't argue with science, right? Wrong. Again. The HOA board meeting was presided over by Chadwick, looking stern behind a large oak, Ironically, table. The other board members looked bored or intimidated. Mrs. Davenport sat in the front row, clutching a Ziploc bag, presumably filled with offending oak leaves as evidence. I presented my case calmly. I submitted the arborist's report, highlighting the sections on the tree's health and structural integrity. I spoke about the tree's age, its environmental benefits, its sentimental value. I reiterated my offer to trim the branches overhanging Eleanor's property. Then, Mrs. Davenport was allowed to speak. She presented her Ziploc bag of leaves. She showed blurry photos of acorns on her patio. She spoke tearfully about the constant year-round mess, the clogged gutters, the squirrel incursions, the fear of falling limbs, despite the arborist certifying its stability, and the oppressive shade that prevented her from growing prize-winning, sun-loving begonias. Chadwick listened intently to her, nodding gravely. When it was his turn to speak, he barely glanced at the arborist report. "Mr. Miller," he began, adjusting his bow tie, "while the board acknowledges the arborist's assessment of the tree's current health, that is not the primary issue. The issue, as outlined in Bylaw 12.5, is the documented nuisance effect on adjacent properties, the constant debris, the excessive shade impacting neighboring landscaping choices," he nodded towards Eleanor. "These constitute a clear burden." "But it's nature," I protested. "Trees shed, that's not a nuisance, it's ecology." "Furthermore," Chadwick continued, ignoring me, "ARC Guideline 7B, established in 2005, encourages homeowners to select appropriately scaled ornamental trees. This particular oak, while perhaps grandfathered in initially, significantly exceeds the scale envisioned for properties in Oak Haven Estates and is therefore non-conforming with current standards." "Current standards? The tree is older than the standards. It's older than most of the houses." I was losing my cool. "Be that as it may," Chadwick said smoothly, "the board must prioritize harmonious coexistence and the uniform aesthetic that protects all our property values. The nuisance is documented. The non-conformance is clear. The appeal is denied. The order for removal within the 60-day time frame stands." He banged his gavel. I stood there, shaking with rage and disbelief. They'd ignored expert testimony. They'd twisted vague guidelines. They were killing my beautiful, healthy tree because Eleanor Davenport didn't like leaves in her pool skimmer. The injustice was staggering. Defeated, I spent the next week in a state of mourning for Bartholomew, who still stood tall and proud, oblivious to his death sentence. The 60-day clock was ticking. The HOA sent a reminder, helpfully including a list of approved tree removal services. With a heavy heart, I called two of them for quotes, needing documentation for the HOA. Having guys walk around my yard, sizing up Bartholomew for destruction, felt like a violation. "Yeah, she's a big one," the first guy said, chewing gum. "Close to the house, power lines nearby, gonna need a crane. Looking at probably $5,000, maybe more, plus stump grinding. $5,000. To destroy something beautiful and healthy. Because of leaves." I thanked him numbly and sent him away. I couldn't bring myself to schedule it yet. I sat under Bartholomew that evening, watching the sunset through his leaves, feeling utterly powerless. They wanted one tree gone because it dropped leaves and took up space, one magnificent, healthy, beneficial tree. And then the anger shifted. It morphed from grief into something else, something creative, something deeply, wonderfully petty. If one tree shedding leaves was a nuisance, what about 50 trees shedding leaves? If one large, non-conforming tree was bad, what about 60 smaller, faster-growing trees creating a dense, light-blocking thicket? If they wanted the oak gone to appease Eleanor, how would Eleanor feel when my entire yard became a source of leaves, twigs, seeds, and shade? The idea bloomed, wild and exhilarating. I wouldn't just remove the oak, I would replace it, exponentially. I would turn my standard suburban lot into a miniature forest, a dense, chaotic, possibly invasive, leaf-dropping middle finger to Chadwick, Eleanor, and the entire concept of harmonious aesthetics. I wouldn't even cut down Bartholomew right away. Oh no, I'd plant around him. Let the saplings get established. Let the HOA see the burgeoning woodland before I complied with the removal order for the original offender. Maximum procedural annoyance combined with maximum ecological chaos. It was madness, glorious, leafy madness. I ran inside, grabbing a notepad. "Maggie!" I yelled, already sketching frantically. "Forget mourning Bartholomew, we're starting a reforestation project." Maggie looked at my wild eyes and the frantic sketches of densely packed tree symbols. "Walt? A reforestation project? In our backyard?" "Exactly." I grinned, feeling alive for the first time in weeks. "They hate one tree? We'll give them a forest. Let's see Chadwick find a bylaw against too much nature." She stared at the sketch, then at me, then back at the sketch. A slow smile spread across her face. "You're completely insane, Walter Miller." "Probably," I agreed happily. "Now, should we go heavy on the fast-growing poplars or mix in some messy mulberries?" My grief transformed into manic energy. I spent hours researching trees online. Not majestic oaks this time. I wanted fast growth, dense foliage, and ideally prolific shedding. Hybrid poplars? Check notorious for fast growth and surface roots. Weeping willows? Maybe near the back fence. Fast-growing lovewater, drop lots of twigs. River birches? Pretty but messy bark. Yes. Sycamores? Huge leaves, perfect. Mulberries? Messy fruit drop. Excellent. Maybe some cheap, fast-growing pines and spruces for year-round screening and needle drop? Absolutely. I wasn't aiming for a balanced ecosystem. I was aiming for maximum leafy impact. I sketched a planting plan, dense, very dense. Forget recommended spacing. I was going for a thicket effect. Narrow pathways winding through maybe, but mostly just trees. Lots of trees. I calculated I could probably cram 60, maybe 70 saplings into my modest quarter-acre lot if I really tried. The plan was simple. Buy dozens of cheap, bare root or small container saplings, plant them everywhere except the immediate footprint of Bartholomew, water them like crazy. And then, only when threatened with imminent legal action or massive fines, schedule the removal of the original oak. By then, the new forest would be undeniably established. Acquiring the arboreal army was phase 2. Local nurseries looked at me like I was crazy when I asked for quotes on 50 or 60 assorted saplings. 60 trees? The teenage kid at Pete's Pots and Plants asked, eyes wide. For here? He gestured around the suburban landscape. Yep, I said cheerfully. Urban Reforestation Initiative. Very eco-friendly. He just blinked. I ended up ordering mostly online bulk bare root saplings were much cheaper, though riskier. Boxes upon boxes started arriving via UPS and FedEx, filled with what looked like pathetic bundles of sticks with a few roots attached. Hybrid poplars, willow whips, tiny spruce plugs, birch seedlings. My garage started to resemble a dormant forest floor. I supplemented with a few slightly larger, but still small, container trees from local sales, the mulberries, a sycamore, a couple of maples for color. My minivan sagged under the load on multiple trips. Maggie just shook her head, muttering about compost and leaf blowers. The planting itself took an entire weekend of back-breaking labor. I rented a gas-powered auger to speed up the hole digging, turning my previously neat lawn into a pockmarked battlefield. Maggie, initially reluctant, got caught up in the sheer absurdity and pitched in, digging, planting, watering. We even bribed Dave, my cynical programmer friend, with pizza and beer to help haul dirt and mulch. "You know this is insane, right, Walt?" Dave puffed, digging another hole surprisingly close to the last one. "You're planting these things like 6 feet apart." "Dense canopy effect, Dave," I replied, wrestling a poplar sapling into the ground. "Maximum shade, maximum leaf drop." We worked like maniacs. Hole after hole, tree after tree. Poplar, willow, birch, spruce, mulberry, sycamore. By Sunday evening, we were exhausted, covered in dirt, and surrounded by, well, not a forest yet, but the undeniable potential for one. My yard was a chaotic grid of skinny sticks poking out of mulch circles. It looked utterly bizarre. Neighbors watched the whole process with reactions ranging from confused amusement to outright alarm. Mrs. Davenport peered through her blinds constantly, her face a mask of horror. Mr. Chadwick drove by slowly on Sunday afternoon, his jaw visibly clenched. He didn't stop. He didn't have to. The message was clear. Game on. The saplings, thankfully, took root. Boosted by careful watering and maybe a little bit of sheer spiteful energy, they started leafing out within a few weeks. My yard transformed from a lawn with tree to a weirdly dense nursery. To add to the effect, I hammered in a small, rustic, hand-painted sign near the sidewalk. Walt's Suburban Reforestation Project. Future Forest, Est 2025. Sponsored by HOA Bylaw 12.5. That last line was perhaps unnecessary, but deeply satisfying. Now that the evidence of my new landscaping direction was undeniable, I finally, reluctantly, called the tree service and scheduled the removal of Bartholomew for the end of the original 60-day deadline. It still felt like a betrayal, but it was a necessary strategic sacrifice. The forest would be his legacy. The sight of 60 young trees where a lawn used to be, combined with my sign, was apparently too much for Mr. Chadwick. He appeared on my doorstep less than 24 hours after the sign went up, flanked by 2 other board members looking deeply uncomfortable. "Miller!" Chadwick barked, bypassing any pleasantries. His eyes darted around the yard, taking in the sheer number of saplings. "What is the meaning of this arboreal anarchy?" And painted sign near the sidewalk. "Good afternoon, Reginald," I said calmly. "Just doing a bit of landscaping, adding some biodiversity. You know, trees are good for the environment." "You were ordered to remove a tree," Chadwick spluttered, his face turning that familiar shade of puce. "Not plant a jungle. This is clearly a violation." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "Which bylaw specifically, Reginald? I've reread the CC&Rs quite thoroughly. Section 12 covers landscaping maintenance, and Guideline 7B encourages appropriately scaled trees, but I couldn't find any specific restriction on the number of trees one can plant. Is there a density ordinance I missed?" Chadwick flipped angrily through his ever-present binder. This is clearly not harmonious. It's overgrown. It will block sightlines. The roots will damage sidewalks. The leaf debris will be exponentially worse." "This is deliberate provocation, Miller," Chadwick accused. "This is reforestation, Mr. Chadwick," I corrected. "Aggressive reforestation, perhaps, but reforestation nonetheless. And I am complying with the order regarding the one specific tree you cited." Chadwick looked like he might actually explode. He threatened new violations, emergency ARC reviews, massive fines for unapproved landscaping plans, which I argued didn't apply to planting individual trees. He vowed the board would find a way to stop this madness. He stormed off, followed by his bewildered board members. A few days later, a truck from the city's planning and zoning department pulled up. A weary-looking inspector got out, holding a clipboard. Chadwick and Mrs. Davenport were hovering nearby, clearly having lodged a complaint. The inspector, a woman named Carol — the universe really loves certain names — walked around my yard, looking at the dense planting of saplings. "Okay," she said, turning to me. "Complaint says, unauthorized planting of excessive number of trees potentially violating setback and sightline ordinances." "Afternoon," I said politely. "Just planted some young trees, officer. Standard landscaping." She consulted her notes. "Well, there's no city code limiting the number of trees on private property, per se. Setback rules apply to mature trees encroaching on right-of-ways, which these clearly aren't yet. Sightline ordinances usually apply to fences or structures at intersections, not saplings in the middle of a yard." She looked at Chadwick and Davenport. "Is there an immediate safety hazard here I'm missing?" Chadwick started sputtering about future root damage. Davenport complained about the eventual shade. Carol sighed. "Folks, potential future problems aren't a code violation now. And shade isn't illegal. As far as the city's concerned, long as he's not planting invasive species right on the property line or blocking traffic views at the corner, what he plants in his yard is largely between him and his HOA." She gave me a look that was part warning, part amusement. "Just maybe check their mature height before they get too big, okay?" She got back in her truck and drove off. Chadwick and Davenport were left fuming. Round 2 to the forest. And so the forest grew. The tree service came, and with genuine sadness I watched them carefully dismantle Bartholomew. It felt wrong, but his sacrifice fueled the growth of his 50-odd replacements. And grow they did. The poplars shot up like weeds. The birches filled out. The willows started weeping dramatically. Within a year, my yard was no longer a grid of sticks. It was a dense, leafy thicket. Sunlight struggled to reach the patio. My lawn died, replaced by mulch and shade-tolerant ground cover. Life in the forest was different. It was cooler in summer, darker in winter. Leaf cleanup in the fall became an epic multi-week campaign, requiring industrial-strength blowers and mountains of yard waste bags. Mrs. Davenport's complaints about leaves hitting her pool became almost constant, though now they were joined by complaints about shade killing her sun-loving flowers and squirrels. So many squirrels. Using my trees as a superhighway to her bird feeders. The HOA kept sending letters, mostly about maintaining landscaping to community standards and potential root encroachment. But they seemed unsure how to actually force me to thin out my legally planted trees without amending the bylaws, a slow and contentious process. It's been 3 years now. My backyard is a forest, a small, dense, slightly chaotic suburban forest. It requires constant pruning to keep branches off the house and away from the fence line. The leaf situation is, frankly, ridiculous. My gutters are perpetually full. But something unexpected happened. Sitting out back, on the now perpetually shaded patio, feels different. It's incredibly private. Birds I never saw before visit. Warblers, finches, even a family of owls took up residence one year. It feels less like a suburban lot, and more like a tiny nature preserve. Maggie has actually come around. She enjoys the privacy and the birds, even if she complains about the lack of sun for her herbs. Dave calls it Walt's Weird Woods. Chadwick retired from the HOA board, possibly due to stress. Mrs. Davenport installed a high-tech pool cover and rarely makes eye contact. The HOA occasionally sends a half-hearted reminder about tree trimming, which I dutifully perform. Was it the smartest or most rational response to the HOA demanding I cut down Bartholomew? Absolutely not. Did it create a whole new set of problems and require way more work than just having the original tree? Without a doubt. But standing here now, looking at the dense canopy, listening to the bird song that's 10 times louder than before, knowing that my yard is now the leafiest, shadiest, most non-conforming patch on the entire block. I feel a deep, woody sense of satisfaction. They took my tree. So I gave them a forest, let them rake that up and put it in their bylaws. Sometimes you just have to let nature and spite take their course.